The Emperor Titus opened the Colosseum in 80 AD, the year after the disaster at Pompeii. The opening games cost the lives of 9,000 animals and 2,000 gladiators. They lasted 100 days. In every arena, thousands of spectators crowded into the various shows. They bet on chariot races, in which some of the drivers, the aurigai, were popular heroes. In Rome, the Circus Maximus could hold 150,000 people. A week of games might cost their organizers millions. The more famous gladiators were very expensive. It cost up to 50,000 sesterces, equivalent to the yearly wages of 1,000 legionaries. And a combat would require at least 120 gladiators. But under the empire, the games were the keystone of the Roman political system. For the rulers, they were the price of popular support. They distracted the plebeians from their hardships or poverty. More and more sumptuous arenas proliferated in the cities.
The gladiators of Roman times, just like those gladiatorial sportsmen and famous actors of today, garnered special treatment. Because they were basically outlaws and slaves, they were apart from society. They could commit virtually any crime, and were forgiven for it by the social hierarchy. They were admired and feted with adulation. Often tiled murals of these famous stars adorned the villa walls of the average Roman who worshipped them. These privileges still exist today for famous sportsmen and actors, and even sportsmen who become actors like O.J. Simpson. Sometimes, like music guru Phil Spector and Robert Blake, they can commit the most outrageous crimes and be let off scot-free due to the peculiar social perspective these creatures are held in. Consider these recent events occurring in Australia and overseas, where famous sportsmen and socialites are given a free hand for the mayhem they commit in our society.
Off-field player behaviour is something all football codes are very aware of these days. Constant media scrutiny means players, well, can't put a foot wrong. But unfortunately, these role models do put their feet in the wrong places, and last week we saw footage of a brawl involving several high-profile AFL players, resulting in 6 of them being charged with assault. Take a look.
Former Lion and Saint Stephen Lawrence stands outside the Prince of Wales Hotel in St Kilda, having been ejected just a minute earlier. He then re-enters to hit a man who falls and lies on the floor for several minutes as a brawl continues inside. St Kilda full forward Fraser Gehrig pushes a woman to the ground. He is later seen helping security march another man onto the street. Brownlow medalist Michael Voss walks out a minute later and strikes a man in the head. Voss's target is this man, Jared Rouse, seen earlier picking up a billiard ball and throwing it at former Brisbane player Craig Lambert. Rouse faces a charge of conduct endangering life. Another Brownlow medalist, Simon Black, was inside the pub. He is charged with assault by kicking. Lawrence, Gehrig and Voss have all been charged with assault-related offences.
Well, this is just one incident in a long line of football players behaving badly, and today we're joined by Tony Jones in Melbourne. Welcome, Tony. They know about the scrutiny. Why do they do it?
Well, that's right, and the game has never been more scrutinised as it is in 2007, that's for sure, Steph. But why they do it is because they're put on a pedestal from the moment they pull on a pair of football boots, and not only by the supporters and the club, but by we as in the media. I mean, you only need to play 3 good games and suddenly you're a club champion. But so they're put up on a pedestal and they simply have too much time on their hands. Gone are the days when Ted Whitten played in the AFL and Johnny Raper played in the NRL, that they would actually have daytime jobs. Their job now is football, and whilst they might train for 3 or 4 hours a day and have a couple of days off, basically they have a lot of time on their hands. We've got a lot of PlayStation experts in the AFL.
So whose job is it then to rein them in? Because clearly the clubs can't keep control of them. The tribunal does, well, that they can look after them for a few hours a week while they're on field. But what about off field? Who's going to take control?
Well, I don't think it's that difficult, is it, to conduct yourself in a civil manner? And we should stress that, I mean, really it is a minority of the 700 plus AFL footballers who are listed at the moment who are actually falling victim of the law, and just by their own weaknesses, I guess. But look, really, I mean, they've just got to learn to conduct themselves properly. They do have welfare officers at the clubs, and the clubs are, and I think Rugby League led the way here, that when the players do go out on end-of-season trips or a drink after a game, they actually have chaperones with them. And I think it comes to that, because whilst the footballers can be dills, the spectators can be just as stupid, and they're the ones who edge them on and sort of bait them at the pubs and all the rest of it. And what the footballers need to do, and sports people right across the spectrum, is just walk away, but they're not doing that at the moment.
No, they're not. And you mentioned there before the NRL, Wendell Saylor, he got hit with an immediate 2-year ban. He was gone. Do you think perhaps that's the only way the players will understand how to conduct themselves off-field? If they're told you can't play, it seems to be the only thing that has any effect. But clearly the clubs are very, very keen to get these players back on the field. Ben Cousins' case in point. You know, the club sent him off for rehabilitation, but they are rushing him back on, say, for a hamstring injury.
Well, the problem is that there is a line of thinking, is that if you've got one of your best players who runs foul of the law and breaks the club rules, well, what do you do there? Do you suspend the player and cut off your nose to spite your face? Whereas if it was a player who's only fringe and causes some indiscretion, then it's all too easy just to cut them off at the knee. So this is the dilemma that the club's got, and what the AFL's saying now is, well, look, we'll take the matters into our own hands, we'll take the onus off you, and when the players do offend in any way, shape or form, we'll decide what penalty there is, because it's very, very difficult for the clubs. I mean, in the case of Alan Didak, for example, a Collingwood champion, best and fairest player, he finds himself in all sorts of trouble by linking up with a member of the Hells Angel. He goes on this wild joyride on the town. He has to face the media and explain his actions, and Collingwood don't suspend him. It's very difficult for the club to do that. They feel as though education is the process. And the other thing here is, just looking at the Alan Didak pictures, the thing that is very mindful with the clubs is sponsors. Now, you would have seen the first media conference there with Alan Didak. It had the backdrop of the sponsors and all the rest of it. Then in the subsequent media conferences like this one, no backdrop whatsoever. So the clubs are now, you know, getting a tap on the shoulder from the sponsors, and they're wanting to know, listen, do we really want to be linked with this?
No, certainly, and even when you say they fall on the wrong side of the law, and clearly there's a couple of players who've been seen hanging out with what they call underworld figures and known drug dealers and the rest, but I think it was Brodie Holland that came up for a court case. His case was put off twice because of his football commitments, and that's clearly giving him privileges for being a footballer.
Well, I think in fairness to Brodie Holland, and look, I don't know the full facts of the case, but from what I do know, it was a reasonably minor altercation, if you like, outside a nightclub. And Brodie Holland's one of those players also, and I'm not just saying this because he's a Collingwood player, Steph, but he's one of these players also that does attract a lot of negative publicity, and I'll get howled down for saying that, but you don't need to be a footballer, do you, to get a case re-adjourned from time to time?
Certainly. Well, just finally and very quickly, Tony, can it be fixed?
Well, it has to be fixed, Steph. In fact, the AFL will, this week or next, sit down with the 16 club chief executives on a whole range of issues, and top of the pops there, in terms of the agenda, is just getting these players to pull their heads in. But the other side of the coin is, just very quickly, is that there is a lot more media scrutiny now. I mean, gone are the days where it was a game played on a weekend. It's played across, 4 different days of the week in just about every state of Australia. It's on live. There are dedicated paid TV channels for sport now, and there's over 1,300 accredited media just covering the AFL. Everyone's looking for a story, and you don't have to step out of line too much if you're a footballer to find yourself on the front page.
All right, Tony, well, all us journos do love a story, and the more scandalous the better. Perhaps we'll catch up with Andrew Dimitri and see what he thinks in the coming weeks. Tony, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Steph.
Well, guys, it looks like it's a problem that's not going anywhere anytime soon, but hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Listen, is Tony still there or not? Is he still sitting there?
Yes, Ross.
He is.
Tony,
Yep.
the whole point of this, if I can actually get on a soapbox, is that the clubs are soft, they're weak. If they think that they want their players, their young players, to conform, they'd take their livelihoods away, wouldn't they?
Well, that's what I mean by they'll do it for the blokes that are sort of borderline at the moment. And Collingwood's a case in point, Ross. And I can say this because Eddie's out of the country, but I can say that there were an instance where 3 young Collingwood boys went to a nightclub after an Adelaide game. They all copped a week's suspension straight after. Alan Didak has hit the headlines for all the wrong reasons, and it's all been well documented, and hasn't been suspended. Having said that, Collingwood will argue that Alan Didak didn't break any club rules as such.
True enough. OK, thank you very much, Tony Jones. You'd have to say also the West Coast Eagles rushing back Ben Cousins is another classic case in point. We'll be right back with Laurie Oakes after the break.